Abuju hindawe maganidak, maigan gijik indishnikaz, maigan indudam. Good evening, everybody. My name is Lorena Fontaine, and I'm the Indigenous Academic Lead at the University of Winnipeg. And I would like to welcome everyone to this evening's Weweni lecture, Indigenizing University Governance. The University of Winnipeg is located on the ancestral lands on Treaty 1 territory. These lands are the heartland of the Métis people. We also acknowledge that our water is sourced from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation. The Weweni lecture series was established by the Canoe family in memory of the late Tobisanequat Canoe. Tobisanequat was a respected Anishinaabe leader, an elder, teacher, healer, honorary degree recipient, and was very committed to the University Winnipeg community, as well as promoting the rich intellectual life of Indigenous peoples. The Weweni lecture series was established with the spirit of caring for and promoting the intellectual life of Indigenous peoples, and we have so many brilliant Indigenous peoples in our communities. This lecture series is a way for us to celebrate that brilliance. We would not be able to hold these lectures without the work of our Weweni committee, and I would like to acknowledge this year's committee. Dr. Julie Pelletier, Karen Froman, Dr. Jamie Cedro, Dr. Paul de Pasquale, Darren Crishane, Dr. Julie Nagum, and Dr. Mary Jane McCallum. Before I call on Dr. Mary Jane McCallum to say a few words about this evening's webinar and also to introduce our distinguished panelists, I would just like to mention a few housekeeping items. This evening's lecture will conclude at 8 p.m. If you have any questions, you can submit them in the Q&A box at the bottom, and I will be monitoring those questions. If we have enough time at the end of the session, we will ask some of the questions for our panelists this evening. Dr. Mary Jane McCallum.
Thanks, Dr. Fontaine. Indigenous administrative leadership has developed in several Canadian universities and universities elsewhere as well over the last 2 decades. There are Indigenous advisors, directors, administrators responsible for Indigenous engagement, initiatives, and advancement, as well as Indigenous deans and vice or associate vice presidents. Initially at the University of Winnipeg, we began in this area with vice president positions filled by non-academics and who dealt exclusively with relations and programming external to the university itself. The first at the University of Winnipeg being established in 2004 as Associate VP Indigenous Government and Community Affairs, now called Associate Vice President Indigenous Engagement. In 2018, the University of Winnipeg began a second Indigenous-specific administrative position entitled Indigenous Academic Lead, currently held by Dr. Lorena Fontaine. This role coordinates Indigenous languages thematic major here at the University of Winnipeg, the Weweni Indigenous Scholars Speakers Series, the Indigenous course requirement, and it also supports the university's overall strategy of indigenization. So that's a huge aspect of that sentence. So what does that involve? It includes supporting staff and faculty on teaching and curriculum development, working with deans and the registrar's office on student issues, including progression through one's degree, misconduct and student initiatives, liaising with senior administration on university work, including equity, diversity, and inclusion, or EDI, serving on committees and at events, and building faculty and staff administrative consciousness about racism, colonialism, and Indigenous knowledge on campus. Dr. Lorena Fontaine will be completing her term in this position in December 2021. And this panel in part honors her work in this role. Dr. Fontaine is in some ways representative of Indigenous scholar administrators. She's an active mid-career scholar with about 20 or more years experience in post-secondary education. She's well known locally throughout the province and beyond for her commitment to reconciliation, cultural revitalization, and the regeneration of Indigenous languages. Like the vast majority of other Indigenous scholar administrators at universities, Dr. Fontaine's also a woman. Likewise, Dr. Fontaine works in a largely white, non-Indigenous and male administration. Many of us indeed know little about this world and the layers upon layers of people and their labor that make the university function. This Weweni lecture is driven by a real curiosity about the threads that connect us and a desire to know more about how our workplace, our community is governed. So I've invited 4 people in 4 different roles to take us through these positions. First, Dr. Chris Anderson is a full professor and dean of the Faculty of Native Studies at the University of Alberta. That's right, I said Faculty of Native Studies. He's an author and editor of many leading and award-winning books in Indigenous studies, including his foundational Métis, Race, Recognition, and the Struggle for Indigenous Peoplehood, and most recently an edited collection entitled Routledge Handbook of Critical Indigenous Studies. Dr. Anderson is Métis and an inaugural member of the Royal Society of Canada's College of New Scholars, Artists, and Scientists. Tonight's presentation draws inspiration from a pre-conference he helped to organize on Indigenous University administration for the 2020 Native American Indigenous Studies Association. Dr. Aroha Harris belongs to the Teirarawa and Nyapui and is Associate Dean of Arts Mataranga Maori, or Maori Knowledge. Dr. Harris is a well-known professional and public historian in New Zealand, past president of the Native American Indigenous Studies Association, as well as the New Zealand Historical Association, and the author of leading contributions in modern Indigenous history, Maori policy, and community development, including her first book, Hikoi, 40 Years of Maori Protest, and more recently with Atoll Anderson and Judith Binney, Tangata Whenua, and Illustrated History. Dr. Harris is a member of the New Zealand Order of Merit for her service to Maori and historical research. Dr. Cheryl Lightfoot is a professor of political science and First Nations and Indigenous Studies. She's also Canada Research Chair in Global Indigenous Rights and Politics and Senior Advisor to the President on Indigenous Affairs. Dr. Lightfoot's book, Global Indigenous Politics, A Subtle Revolution, has been followed by several national grants that help to support her scholarship on state apologies to Indigenous peoples and challenges associated with implementing Indigenous rights in advanced democracies. Dr. Lightfoot is an Anishinaabe citizen of the Lake Superior Band of Ojibwe on the Michigan side. Dr. Florence Glenfield is Vice Provost, Indigenous Programming and Research, and Professor of Mathematics Education at the University of Alberta. A member of the Métis Nation of Alberta, Dr. Glenfield explores the interaction of different knowledge systems in mathematics and science education. Dr. Glenfield has held the position of chair of the Department of Secondary Education, the Faculty of Education, and she's published on the reimagining of STEM, especially the M, within Indigenous and ecological perspectives. So together, the group of 4 has like 125 years invested in Indigenous post-secondary work. I'm rounding there. It might be more. If you add Lorena and I in, it'd be closer to 200 years. I want to begin the conversation by going around and having each of the participants describe their positions, their responsibilities and accomplishments, and their approach to university administration and some of the things that they've learned in this role. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask people to go alphabetically. So we'll go Dr. Anderson, Dr. Glenfield, Dr. Harris, and Dr. Lightfoot. And then at that point, we'll move into more direct questions. And Chris I'll hand over the moderation role over to Chris at that point. Thanks very much.
Perfect. Thanks, MJ. Hi to everyone out there in Zoom land. And thank you to the panelists who agreed to come today. My name is Chris Anderson. I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Native Studies. I just realized that in January of this year was the end of my 5th year of my first term. And as it turns out, I have to make a decision in the next 2 weeks about whether I'm going to run for a second term as dean. So we'll see how that goes. I'm Métis, as MJ said, originally from Saskatchewan. I've lived in Edmonton for 25 years now. This is my 25th year. I moved there in 1996 to start my PhD, and basically just never left. Yeah, I mean, I have 3 degrees in sociology, 2 from Queen's University in Ontario, and then the last one from the University of Alberta here. And when I went to Queen's University, Ontario, it was basically just to get away from home. I didn't even know it was a good university until I got there. I actually went to play football. And then once I got there, it turned out I was a shitty football player, but not a bad student. And so kind of worked my way through the ranks. Yeah, I mean, being a dean, I'm one of only 2 deans of an Indigenous Studies faculty in the world, as far as I know. And my major duties consist of coordination, budget stuff, mentorship, communication regarding kind of what's great about the Faculty of Native Studies. And it is a all-consuming job, and like any of the positions that are in senior leadership like this, it is exhausting and a recipe for burnout if you let it be. And with that, I'll turn it over. On that hopeful note.
Okay, we'll turn it to Dr. Glenfield.
So hello, everybody, and thank you for the invitation to participate. As Mary Jane mentioned, I am a member of the Métis Nation of Alberta, and my position at the University of Alberta is a relatively new position. It's been less than 2 years, and it's called Vice Provost Indigenous Programming and Research. And my responsibilities in that position are multi-layered, but I'll just read my job description, and it sounded very much like Dr. Fontaine's. But I lead the development, consultation, and approval of an Indigenous strategic plan, developing and implementing ethical policies and procedures to guide engagement with Indigenous communities through research and in community engagement, support the work of faculties and departments to indigenize curricula across programs, building and nurturing positive relationships with Indigenous communities in Alberta, chairing a couple of committees, a few committees, and fostering a supportive environment for Indigenous faculty, staff, and students. I joined the Academy in the late 1998 in my first academic position. I am educated, my first degrees are in mathematics and education. So I was a high school mathematics teacher before I moved into the Academy. I started teaching in 1982. And one of the questions that we were asked is, what is my approach to university administration? And my approach to university administration is that I'm a teacher. And so I position myself as an educator in all the work that I do. And the concepts of reconciliation, the concepts of indigenization are all really abstract concepts for most people. And I argue, or I suggest, that I know what it means to teach about abstraction and how important it is to continue to visit and revisit, and that people are on individual journeys. And so I position myself as an educator. When I get frustrated, I return to my roots of educator, and I always find a way to navigate the spaces. So I have been very lucky to work alongside Chris and my other amazing colleagues at the University of Alberta. I cannot talk about the greatest accomplishments at this point in time because we are a work in progress. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Glenfield. Dr. Harris?
Kia ora, tēnā koutou e whakarongo mai nā. Kia ora, everybody. As Dr. McCallum said, I am Associate Dean Mātauranga Māori in the Faculty of Arts here at the University of Auckland. But like Dr. Glenfield, it's a fairly new position. I think I've been in it for about 18 months, and it started when I started, and it's been a very particular 18 months, the past 18 months. So many of the things we had planned in the first 6 months just did not happen, and hopefully there'll be a time when they can happen. I think when I thought about the question of can I describe my position and my key responsibilities, well, some days I'm not sure that I can. I feel like it's a role that occurs in a constant state of flux, and the global pandemic has just deepened and complicated the flux that always exists in a university system. And because it's a new position as well, I think I've been kind of working things out on a day-to-day and a week-to-week basis. But the core of the role actually began with research. So it was about applying Māori knowledge to the research that the faculty is getting into, whether it's assisting people with their funding applications, because centrally some of our funds require now some commentary on what we call vision Mātauranga, which is a Māori knowledge strategy within research. So that was the core of it. But I said very early on that if I took a role like this in the faculty, I didn't think I could do it and only focus on research, that it needed to have a wider brief. As they say, be careful what you wish for. So, I see it as a strategic role in the faculty, more of an overview role, getting those structures and frameworks in place. So, and having other people who do the day-to-day, operationalising of particular activities and programs. So similarly to Dr. Glenfield as well, it feels a little bit early to be thinking about greatest accomplishments, but I am really pleased with some work that had happened in the sphere that had started before I began, and one is a big values project that's been run by our Kaiarahi, our Māori navigator in the faculty, Dr. Hirangi Ka. So it's about embedding, what are our faculty's values, and he's proposed a set of actually Māori values, and that those are the faculties of the values of the faculty. And it's a really useful framework that we can apply now to a whole range of work. So that's one thing I've been really pleased about, and maybe in the discussion we can get into that a little bit more. I think my last comment is on the question of what are some of the things I've learned about Indigenous scholar administration. And I guess I would say that being an academic hasn't trained me for administration at all. But also I'm not sure how you can do university administration without academics. Academics have to be in the mix somewhere, otherwise we might not be the universities that we think we are anymore. Kia ora.
Dr. Lightfoot.
Yeah, thanks, Mary Jane. I'm not used to going last in the alphabet with only an L name, but here we are. So I'll take my last 4 spot. So as Mary Jane introduced me, I'm Anishinaabe from Lake Superior. My home reserve is on the Michigan side, so it's on the southern side of the lake, but my relatives, of course, are located 360 degrees around the lake, and that border is just a nuisance and has been for about 200 plus years now, and it becomes an even bigger nuisance in our current state of pandemic. I'm senior advisor to the president of UBC, University of British Columbia, on Indigenous affairs, and I've been in this role since the summer of 2018. And it's a 5-year term, so I can say I am now on the downhill side. I've passed the midpoint and on the downhill side of the 5 years. And in some ways, that seems incredibly fast, and I can't believe I'm already halfway through plus, and at the same time, it seems like 100 years ago that I began in the position, because there's been so much that has happened in the last 3 years. My role is both new and not new. My predecessor held my role since 2009, but he held 2 roles together. He was both senior advisor and director of the First Nations House of Learning. And so that was a combined role for his 2 5-year terms. And then when he left the role and started stepping into retirement, out of that search process, the decision was made to split the position into 2 different roles and 2 different people. So I hold only the senior advisor role, and then my colleague Margaret Moss holds the director of the House of Learning. So partially this was done because both of us had different skill sets, different experiences, different interests, and also we were both still active researchers and academics. And so part of the logic of just giving us partial administrative roles was so that we could keep our research programs active. And I would say that has been moderately successful, with some challenges that we can get into in the discussion point. And also, I think one of the challenges that has been the hardest for the 2 of us is that administration decided they would split the roles, and then they walked away, and they let us to decide how exactly those were to be split, who held which part of the responsibilities, budgets, who was responsible. So it does become a highly collaborative exercise, but I'm not going to dispute the fact that it has been a challenge, and it would have been nice to have more guidance initially. But after 2.5 years, we're both pretty well figuring it out. My part of the role is to, this is pretty broad, provide vision, leadership, and diplomacy in advancing the Indigenous strategic agenda on a cross-campus basis. Because of course we have 2 campuses, Vancouver and in the Okanagan, and then also on a cross-portfolio basis. So both the academic and the operational and external side. So I'm supposed to work with all the vice presidents and on a cross-campus basis. I report directly to the president's office, so that helps in particular ways in terms of the structure. Certainly talking to the other vice presidents and cross-campus, that's a position of strength. It also has some particular downsides, but we can get into that more in the discussion. Our big accomplishment thus far has been and I've been a co-lead on the team that developed our 2020 Indigenous Strategic Plan, which renewed and refreshed our earlier 2009, what we called Aboriginal Strategic Plan at that point. So our task was to integrate the UN Declaration, the TRC calls to action, and the Missing Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Inquiry's calls to justice into the new plan and embed that into the plan. And do it also in what we thought was a human rights-based approach. So a grassroots, broad-based approach in developing the plan. And so we did officially launch that with the board's endorsement in September of 2020. So now we are squarely into the early implementation phase, and a whole new set of challenges is in front of us that we're working through. And I just also want to mention, technically speaking, my role is at 20% of my time, which means I get compensated at 20%, but in no way is my workload 20%. So this is a huge challenge, and it does take its toll. With a nod to Chris about burnout and energy, it comes at a serious cost. So we should talk about that. My approach to administration, I view as Indigenous human rights based. And by that, I mean two things in particular. And the first is I feel I have an obligation and a duty to advance human rights or insert Indigenous human rights within the university context in order to help create a better environment, a more inclusive, more respectful environment for Indigenous students, staff, faculty, and also for improved Indigenous engagement relationships in the research areas, the operation areas, and community relations. And given that university institutional structures date back to the Middle Ages, this is no small task to try to do any sort of restructuring or systems change. So I think my approach ends up being what I could call politely provocative on most days. And so when I build off of that politely provocative approach, my work ends up, I would describe it as relational and dialogical. And so that means my pathway is engaging one-on-one with VPs and leaders and trying to get them to see the logic and the good pragmatic business plan of a new approach and systems change. And so it's a labor intensive way to work, but so far been effective in some, and in those that it isn't, I don't worry about. I call it, I target my efforts at the middle 80%, because there are 10% that we're never going to bring along, and there are 10% that are already behind us and we don't need to talk to them. It's that middle 80 that we really need to focus on, in my view. And so I spend a lot of time there. Most pressing needs at the university there are two things that I see. One is to do the big shift. And I've been preaching this for a couple of years now, and I will until I leave this role, that this work is not the primary responsibility of Indigenous individuals. This is non-Indigenous people's work by and large. And so we need to tip the way that this has been working in the past, which is we do all the work and they're the recipients. We need to shift that model. We're here to help, guide, support, advise, but the work is theirs. And we have to turn it around so that it is squarely focused that way, and that their responsibilities and accountabilities sit there at their levels. And then as most institutions, just trying to get folks to think deeply and action things in a meaningful way, not just get out their spreadsheets and put their action items down and write in everything they can that responds to that action item. Trying to get them to shift their thinking so that they choose 5 to 10 areas that are their priorities, that begin from where they are. So whether this is a particular faculty or a department or an operational unit, first take stock. Where are you in terms of Indigenous engagement, and where can you get? And then work with them on those priorities, rather than trying to get them to do in a thin and superficial way 46 things. Find 5 to 10 where they can really focus and move the needle. So that's just my thinking. I'm happy to hash out any of those items in the question period.
Great. Thank you so much for those introductions. That's great. I'll turn it to you, Chris.
Great. Thanks, Mary Jane. Thank you to all of you for your introductions. Just to let all the folks in the audience know that we're on a fairly tight timeline here in terms of when people have to do other things. So I just want to let people know we're not going to be going over. We have a list of questions here that MJ and I bounce back and forth with each other. But if we don't get to all of them, that's not really a big deal either, because you know, the way that you answer these questions will kind of connect to other questions that we have. So I'll start by asking the first question, and I want to say that when MJ asked me to moderate this, I was quite excited and quite honored, obviously, but it's quite daunting to figure out what kinds of questions could one ask that would kind of be containable within the context of the I don't know, 29, and then we cut that down to seven or eight or whatever it was. But these are all questions that I'll ask the panelists. You don't have to answer you don't have to answer any given question. You can pass on it, and if you do answer it, you can answer it kind of however you like. This really is kind of a, explore the studio space, more cowbell kind of discussion. So. MJ, with your permission, I'm actually going to ask the questions a little bit out of order to connect to what we've been talking about so far. And I'll begin with the question to all of you. What does self-care mean to you? And given the ever-present specter of burnout, what do you do to kind of put your own mask on first when you can? And maybe Cheryl, we'll start with you because your talking is warmed up, and I just found out that that's only a 20% rule for you, which is absolutely bananas to me.
Yeah, in addition, you carry the role of Canada Research Chair, which means that you are often at universities, your service load is reduced in order for you to do the research. So,
yeah, all of that. Partially my fault. I said yes at the end of the day. And part of the reason I said yes is because of the 80-20 split. I thought that this was going to be a little bit lighter load on me. What I didn't calculate was, and this is a blessing actually, and a curse at the same time. What I didn't calculate or expect was how serious the university leadership was about a new plan, and how much they wanted that and wanted it to be something path-breaking. And so I embraced that actually, because I thought of it as a moment of opportunity that comes once in a lifetime, and I wasn't going to pass it up. And I knew that that was going to mean a whole lot of extra work. So how did I do that? I didn't intend to do it alone. So I asked for the additional resources that I expected I would need. And I also understood that developing a plan was a fairly short-term project. We were going to finish that in 12 months or less. So I asked for contract help. I asked for a consulting firm to help. I wanted Indigenous peoples in those positions as much as possible. So I had particular ideas in mind. And I made sure to ask for everything I thought I would need so that I had the team. I assembled the team that was going to make this work. So I felt good about that. And then I also, importantly for me, is the synergies between my CRC work and this plan. And so I wasn't reinventing the wheel. I wasn't starting off, and it wasn't all off on a tangent. So it's not all distraction. It's very consistent. So I think that's a rare formula because that's just luck. I just happened, my CRC is about Indigenous human rights implementation. So that's what this plan is. So there were very close connections. But Chris's question is an important one because I'm not going to lie, I've been working crazy amounts of hours like a dog for 2.5 years. And the sacrifices on the personal level have been extreme. And I guess I was at a point in my life where I could do that, but I also know it's not sustainable. So it has to be a very short-term project that one is it has to be a passion project that one is dedicated to in order to make that happen. But that has an end date because you cannot work at that kind of pace for that long of a period of time. Now, in the pre-COVID world, self-care to me meant taking extra days here and there if I had a trip somewhere, that I was doing a speaking engagement or a conference, taking a few extra days for myself. COVID has not allowed that. And so I've had to work a little harder to find ways to take time away since we can't actually leave the city limits right now and even go to the suburbs. So we have to think carefully about how we do that, how we unplug, how we take care of ourselves and be more deliberate about it.
Thanks, Cheryl. Anyone else want to jump in?
Yeah, I will. Like Cheryl, I feel like I've got a pre-COVID and a post-COVID response. So for me, in a pre-COVID world, when you could get to the NASA conference annually, that was a huge part of self-care for me. And what I call trans-Indigenous exchange, I don't care if we're going off, if friends are going off to spend a weekend somewhere after the conference, or if we're going out for dinner and drinks, that kind of exchange that you have as Indigenous scholars continues through those social times for me. And I've really missed that, actually, probably more than I thought that I might. But that whole social element to me has been important, whether it's with family, whether it's with my younger nieces and nephews and supporting whatever it is they're getting up to. That's all very, I find that very relaxing for me, even though I make jokes about, putting fun into dysfunctional when we're getting together as a family. But, it kind of grounds me and sort of reminds me that my job is not everything. And even regardless of how passionate I get about some of my research projects, it's not the whole of me and doesn't have to be. And my favourite way of putting my own mask on first, and I think Mary Jane can attest to this, is to get to the beach. Whenever I can, take time out and get there and disconnect and, just slow down for a minute. Good question. I agree with that. Cheryl.
Thanks, Aroha. Florence, do you want in or are you good?
Oh, yeah, I can't. I'm not very good at this one, so I'm going to pass. I just work all the time, but I really love my work, and so it fills me. I mean, if I get feeling draggy, I just have to turn my attention to some of my research or remembering a conversation that I had with a group of amazing colleagues, and I feel better. So, but I do like to be around trees. Trees are my relatives for this, and that's where I connect. Thank you.
Thanks, Florence. One of the things that MJ and I had talked about, it's not lost on me that that I'm the lone male on the panel, and the rest are women. And in fact, as MJ pointed out, senior administration in an Indigenous context, at least in the academy, is very much a female experience. And so the question that we wanted to ask was, and you can interpret this however you like, in what ways have gender relations in the academy shaped your experiences as an administrator?
I can start that if it's okay with you, colleagues. So I think it's greatly shaped me, given that, but now I studied in mathematics first, and then in education and mathematics education. So my early career work at a university and my studies were in these very male-dominated areas. And as soon as I could, I became very interested in around structure and power relations. And so for me, I wanted to understand how is it that these relationships work, and how is it that structures within systems work. So I'd be an early advocate for females in mathematics, because when I looked around, there were very few of us studying mathematics in the mid-70s. And then I don't even know if there was another Indigenous person in mathematics at the time. But so I was very conscious of this, and I kept speaking out. So my early work around and I'm going to use the word equity and diversity, was around female representation. And I was not really able to identify or name the way in which I am as an Indigenous person within that realm. And that took me a while. I was mentored by an amazing Anishinaabe scholar by the name of Dr. Cecil King in my first academic role. And I was at the University of Saskatchewan. And he came alongside me and he taught me a lot about what does it mean to be an Indigenous scholar in the academy. And it was from his teachings and his mentorship that I realized that I had a voice that was not only about female, but it was also about Indigenous knowledges and the ways in which I grew up and understood the world, and that I had a voice, that I should have a voice. So it was Dr. Cecil King. And just a funny story, just as I was beginning my PhD, we were at a community gathering and my auntie introduced me to this group of elders. And the elder said, "You need to be at the university. You need to change things there." And I have spent the last sort of 25 years trying to live out what they told me in that circle that day. So gender played a role, but it started off because I was a little girl, a little teenage girl in a math department where there weren't very many women.
Thanks for that, Florence. Aroha or Cheryl?
I can jump in if
Sure.
you like. I think for me, gender has played very different roles at different phases of my career, and admin has brought them together in a complex and sometimes difficult way. So my earliest career was in community-based Indigenous organizations in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And there's a long history there of very active organizations. There's this whole community of organizations, and it's almost 100% female led. And so I grew up in that environment where everybody that my mom knew and all of her friends, everyone was running some program or some organization. This was totally normal to me. And, you know, there were a few men around, but it was really a female driven, female leadership world. So that was very normal to me. And in the first 15 years of my career, that's where I was. And I just thought women did everything all the time, all the heavy lifting, all the leadership, all the planning. And men essentially did what they were told and showed up and were told what to say and how to behave. Then I came to academia mid-career and into a very male-dominated discipline and department of political science, in a very with a very conservative bent. So all of a sudden, that changed entirely gender relations in a way that was tremendously challenging for me to find my space in there. So not only to be female in a department where I think we only had 8 women out of 30 faculty or some crazy number like that, but also to be the only Indigenous person of color it created a double marginalization that was really challenging. Moving to admin has kind of mixed it up again in a strange sort of way. The world that I operate in now is largely male and non-Indigenous, no doubt, but the Indigenous leadership network across both campuses is predominantly female. And so by linking up and working collaboratively in that network style, I think we build on a lot of strength and it becomes a formidable force. And so I think it's that collaborative work that Indigenous women can do, and standing together is a pretty powerful force. And it becomes very difficult for non-Indigenous men to say no. And I like that because then we can kind of get done what we need to get done. But it does require standing together because if and this is one thing I've noticed about non-Indigenous senior leadership is if they sense for a minute, even a sniff of disunity or disharmony, they will drive that wedge in order to divide. So it's been in my work very important to stand in solidarity and support one another as Indigenous women.
Thank you for that, Cheryl. Aroha, do you want to step in, or are you fine?
I think I'll just end up repeating what Florence and Cheryl have said. So
Okay,
I'm fine.
thank you.
Yeah.
One of the things that MJ and I talked about was sort of thinking about what positions like this require in terms of the personal qualities of the people that go into the position, and also the structure itself, what it looks like. I sometimes chuckle when I get community members who accuse me of not knowing that the university is a colonial place, and it's like, yeah, no, I got a handle on that, having been here for 25 years. I got a pretty good sense, probably better than you do actually, how in fact it is so thoroughly colonial. But I want to ask a couple of questions to you all, one talking about kind of like the individual element and the other the structural element. And I'll start with the structural element, which is what types, in your minds, what types of university governance, power, and funding structures are needed to successfully support Indigenous administrators?
So this is a big question, and I'm going to try and answer it from a very specific University of Auckland perspective. So our campus, the central part of our campus, used to be a Māori, Ngāti Whātua, actually, they're the local iwi here, used to be one of their pātu watawata, their fortified villages, and it was quite a populated area. In another life, before the university was here, this was the site of colonial government. We have what we call Old Government House, which is literally a government house on our campus. We have the old Parliament site across the road, and it was Government House at the time that the governor of the day, Governor George Grey, planned his attack on his invasion of Waikato, south of Auckland. So it was a barracks at one point, and there's a remnant of the barrack wall is still on the university campus. So it was a place, it was built specifically, the barracks, to protect Aucklanders, newcomers, settlers who had come to Auckland, to protect them from to protect, they said, 19th century fake news said that Māori from the north were going to come down and attack Auckland. And so the idea was that the barracks would protect the people. Well, that attack was never coming and didn't arrive, but lucky for them, they got to plot an invasion to the south of Auckland from this place. So that's that's who we are. That's our campus here at the University of Auckland. So I would it always surprises me, and it should stop surprising me, about how few people know those stories. And I could go on and bring in more of, what this place was like before Pākehā settlement, and, really connect back to the Ngāti Whātua people here. But for me, in terms of mātauranga, in terms of Māori knowledge, I would like a university governance and structure that appreciates the knowledge of this land, of this very specific place that we're in, and not just that colonial history, but actually the deeper knowledge that the original people of this place have to offer us, and to let that knowledge, those values that they hold, those deep understandings that they hold, shape the university in very fundamental ways. And so I don't know how much that costs. I don't know how to structure funding around that. But it would be, I feel like it would be enormously supportive to me as a Māori administrator here if everybody that I work with, had that knowledge and appreciated what Māori knowledge can bring to the space, and what Māori knowledge can do to transform the space, if our university is willing for that to happen and is willing to let go of something. Yeah, that's my typical humanities answer, probably, with loads and loads of questions.
It's a great answer, Aroha, especially when we think about the extent to which universities are in urban spaces that have both physically and conceptually removed indigeneity from the everyday lexicon of where we live. Florence or Cheryl, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I don't know, Chris. I don't think I do. I don't think I can add anything else, because I think this is the complexity of it, and every university is different, right, in their structures. And I know, just I want to share a bit about, as the University of Alberta came to this position description, it took 1.5 years, led by Chris and another colleague, Shayna Dion, to conceptualize this position description. And I remember in 2011, I was part of a group where we had written an Aboriginal strategic plan where we imagined a position like this, but I don't think we were in a position to support it. And one of the things that I think has happened since 2017 in our context, when I say we were in a position to support it, there's almost a sense around the entire university culture and all the units that this is where we need to be at this point in our history as an institution. So I find that I can't talk necessarily about funding, but there's enough capacity right now for us to do the work. So that's how I think about it right now.
I'll jump in a little bit too, Chris, if I might, because I've spent together with my team a lot of time, and especially in the last, I guess it's March, so 12 months, thinking about how to restructure or innovate the design of the system and create a network. Again, I'm referring back to that network of actors. How to build that to avoid the biggest pitfall that I saw was going to happen at this institution if we didn't do that. And Florence, I appreciate you saying each institution is different. I mean, they all are the same in some ways, but they each have their own individual cultures, norms, behaviors. And my fear was that this institution at this time, if we had a single position, and there were some calls for a VP Indigenous early on in our process, I had the sense that if we had done that, that there would be an impulse to just dump everything on that person, and I knew what was going to happen. Was it would be that person plus 2 support staff, and then everybody would dump responsibility over into that office. And I saw that's just the inclination here. It's the culture, and I think a lot of places share that. And we wanted to push back against that. Again, shift the model so that it's not the one sole Indigenous burnt out person doing the work. It needs to spread to all of the portfolios and all of the faculties. So how are we going to do that? First of all, not put one person in that position, but flip the model. So the responsibilities now become the VPs and the deans, and me with my little 2 support staff are kept deliberately lean so that we can't become the dumping ground of everything Indigenous. And so we are here strictly to guide, advise, support in any way possible, but the work has to go to all of those other places. But I couldn't do that without strong support from the president and the board of governors. And so I had to make sure that I had their full support. And also the 2 provosts on both campus are key to this, because they have to communicate and it has to be resourced. And so these are the keys. And I also couldn't do it alone. I needed staff positions. And so I asked for what I needed there. Again, 20%. So I have to be reasonable and hire enough people to help do the work, do the workshops, the toolkits, have the meetings with each dean and help design their own plans. But yeah, I've had to rethink how to embed this work so that it just doesn't become a high-level commitment without action. We want to actually move things in a meaningful way. So I've did environmental scans, talked to a lot of folks at different universities about what their challenges were, what the strengths were of their models, and we tried to design something new for this institution that would build on its strengths, but also try to avoid the pitfalls. So we're just rolling out the model now. So I also built in that we would do a check back in 3 years. So if we can fine tune what isn't working and try to move ahead with something else at that point. Plus cultures and circumstances shift. So in 3 to 5 years, we may have a very different landscape in front of us, and we need to be open to that and keep dynamic and keep responsive.
Yeah, thanks for that, Cheryl. And I think it is really important for us to think about what the implications are of understanding that however power operates in the post-secondary system, it does refract specifically into university campuses, and so it's going to refract differently based on kind of the histories and the institutional autobiographies of any given campus. When MJ and I were talking about this earlier, one of the things that had occurred to me, and this is sort of in support of what you're saying, Cheryl, that when it gets hived off to the side on something, then you're in a situation where you have to go through a whole chain of people, any one of whom can say no and stop that right there. And then, so the other part of that tension is, if you're going to build it into the work that other people otherwise wouldn't do but are doing, how can you do that in a way where they actually know to reach out and do it in relation, rather than just assuming that if they plow ahead, they know what the right thing is. So it's interesting to kind of watch how those two tensions play out on different campuses.
Absolutely. And that's why I say I've taken a relational approach. So multiple times go around to each dean, multiple times go around to each VP, so that you become a known face, a known relationship. And part of our original process was to reach out and have one-on-one meetings with each of those individuals to say, we're starting this new plan. Where are you at? And what do you need? And then another touch point, another. So that way, I'm just trying to build in that cultural shift and familiarity, and alleviate discomfort, and actually try to get them on side and know that these are very doable things and they're appropriate for their own context. And hopefully they'll have accomplishments that then they're proud of and happy to talk about in a couple of years.
Yeah, and I think leading in from the discussion we just had now, Florence was speaking a second ago about our colleague Shana Dion, who's right now the Assistant Dean of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit students at the University of Alberta and in the Office of the Dean of Students. And one of the things that Shana likes to say is that not every Indigenous person is cut out to be in post-secondary. And it's not a criticism, it's not a critique, it's just some people have personalities suited to it. Some people just can't be bothered with kind of the amount of shit that we have to shovel as senior administrators. And so I give that as a context for the next question, which is, in your views, what types of skills and experience and qualifications and commitments best position Indigenous higher administrators to be successful in their roles? Like, what is that kind of that magic mix for you all that sort of gives you a good sense that someone is going to be successful versus not, bearing in mind the different levels of hostility that the structure that they work within can exist at, you know, different levels?
Well, I'll start, Chris. And I really appreciated the words from our colleagues here in the previous section. So I want to just say that, I mean, for me, the phrase relationality is really important. But I want to say that I think in my particular circumstance, one of the strengths I have is I can sit down and I can talk with researchers from every single discipline. And it's because I can understand different research methodologies, as an example. So I grew up in the bush. I grew up on the land, I guess. I grew up understanding what happens in relationships with land. And so I can sit next to the water researchers and ask them about their baseline data. And I'm not afraid to ask them if they've talked to the elders and knowledge keepers in communities where they're talking about the impact of their water studies on a particular, river across this nation. And so I think a skill, I feel like I'm doing a pretty good job at the work I'm doing, but part of it is because I can talk to all of these different researchers. And those researchers are the administrators as well. So the people who take on senior leadership roles are coming from these different disciplines. But I also understand really well what it means to grow up in community and to be alongside. And I always say I'm walking alongside people. I'm not afraid to ask questions and frame the questions. And one of our colleagues earlier made this point about maybe probing, but I'm just not afraid to ask questions. And so I call it courage. The courage is needed in order to ask hard questions of the practices that we have and the way in which we engage in work we do. So I think we have to understand the systems. I think we have to be able to ask those courageous questions and be in relationship, recognizing we're always in relationship. Thank you.
Thanks, Loris. Araha, maybe I'll give you a chance to dive in here because you made a very intriguing comment earlier about how being an academic, you need to be an academic to be an administrator, but the one doesn't prepare you for the other.
Yes. I think academics have to be in the mix of administration. Our Pro VC Māori office has got, we've got our Ihunuku, the Pro VC Māori, the position's actually vacant at the moment, and then we've got a kaiarataki alongside her. She was a female woman last time, and it's kind of like a deputy role, but also has a very specific part of that portfolio. So it's kind of, and he's not an academic staff member. He's what we call professional staff here. So I think I don't think I'd go as far as saying that you have to be an academic to be in administration roles, but I do think you've got to have academics in the mix, and there are probably some roles that ought to be academics, and of course we've also got highly qualified professional staff anyway. So, but in terms of, I don't feel prepared for an administration role. I can't see where in my academic training I was prepared for administration. I think that I naturally tend to be quite highly organised. But even that isn't always what you need when you're sitting around the table with senior leadership. I'm not a fast thinker. I'm not quick off the mark like some people are. And when I am, I'm often not diplomatic. So it's kind of, you get this kind of, the quick version of me is sometimes mean. So do you get that version, or do you make the table kind of slow down to your pace and give you, so you can have a chance to think and to put your thoughts across? A thick skin helps. I feel like I've developed my thick skin from a very young age. I have to work with people who can't pronounce my name, but I started school with people who couldn't pronounce my name. So, I guess I've learned to live with that. So there's those small little things that you have to develop a tolerance for, I guess. And I think you have to, for me, in any of these kinds of roles, I like to have a project. I like to think, well, I'm really committed to X and I'm going to work on that, and I'll do all the other pieces of the work that I'm required to do, but I want to get to the end of my term and look back and be able to say I had this project and it worked out really well. That's what I want to, so it gives me a focus, and hopefully I choose a project that is something that the faculty needs or something that the university needs. We've got, say, I think we must be about 4,500 or 5,000 students in our faculty, and about 1,200 of them are Māori and Pacifica students. And so I'm quite keen on working things at this local level within the faculty, because I'm committed to the arts having a stronger say in how the university operates. I'm committed to the arts really showing some leadership in some of that hard thinking that we have to do as a university, especially when it comes to mātauranga and the Treaty of Waitangi and Māori students, Māori staff, all that stuff. I really want the arts faculty to get ahead of everything and really lead in that space and do the deep thinking. And so that's the kind of, I try and keep that in mind as I do this role, which on a daily basis can be quite a grind. But if I can see how everything I'm doing plugs into that broader vision, I think I'm a happier person. Maybe I'm fooling myself, but rather be fooled and happy, I think, than just grinding away every minute of the day.
Yeah, definitely. Cheryl, do you want to jump in, or are you good?
Yeah, I don't want to repeat too much. And I think personally, the fact that I had an earlier career at the community level in organizations, and I actually ran one nonprofit for almost a decade. It didn't hurt. So having that plus the academic was a pretty powerful combination. But that's rare, because most people go into one or the other. They don't switch careers midway. But any sort of on-the-ground background, I think, ahead of academic career or alongside academic career, lots of Indigenous academics have that because they work in community settings or in collaboration with organizations. So I think build on those strengths and those observations. And then I think being a student of politics, the Indigenous rights movement, and power structures, I had some deep insights and observations that I carry with me from my whole life's work about how to move things, what are the opportunity points, how to, when you get stuck, how to rethink, retreat, figure out what your position is that you can live with, and move forward on that. So I think in terms of personal characteristics, in addition to thick skin, because I will absolutely agree, you need a thick skin, and I have plenty of scars on my back to prove that. But also just the tenacity. So when you do get stuck or when you do get shot down, how to be able to feel that disappointment, but also regroup and come up with your next best option and feel good about that and move forward on that. I think that's also just as important, because I don't get everything I want and on the timeline I want, but if I can come back to a regroup and come to a position that I can live with and feel pride in, then I feel like I've accomplished something.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the answers from all of you. We've got about 20 minutes before we have to land this plane here. And we have 2 questions left. So I'm going to ask the panelists one question, and you can answer it as you will. And then for the last question, I'm going to ask it so that everybody, Mary Jane and Lorena as well, can weigh in if they feel moved. But asking the first question first, what do you all find most fulfilling about your positions, and what's been most challenging so far? Florence, maybe we'll start with you.
Okay, sure. Thank you, Chris. What I absolutely love about my work as an administrator is that you get to imagine new possibilities and different possibilities, and that you can be a part of thinking of the structures to make those possibilities happen. And it is by having wide networks of conversations. And I love that. I love that every single day I have a diversity. My meetings are no two cover the same kind of topic. And I really like that. And I like that engaging my Indigenous colleagues on campus as part of it, and non-Indigenous colleagues, to better understand how we need to engage in this work that we need to do in institutions. So that's what I love about my work and the relationships that I'm building.
And what do you find challenging?
I say my challenging, sorry, I was going to say, so my common phrase are, these are the things that burn my bananas. I don't know what that means, but that's my way of expressing frustration is one thing. I think the challenging piece is actually when people think that universities aren't doing the work they're doing, and that there's been people, like I think about all of our amazing colleagues on this and the colleagues that came before us in these institutions, that work has been happening. We're on a journey, and we just didn't wake up 2 days ago. So I think I really like to remind people that the work is happening, has happened and has been happening, and that we're on this journey, and we have new awarenesses and new understandings each year. And so we can begin to name things. So nothing can be stable. And it really burns my bananas when people think that we have to have a policy that can't be looked at in a new way this year, because last year it was actually a different time. So that's my banana burning challenges.
Thanks, Florence. Who else would like to jump in on this? What's fulfilling and what's challenging?
I can go ahead, Chris. I have some thoughts. Oh, sorry, Aroha. Sorry. I'll go ahead. For me, most fulfilling is that I feel that the work I'm doing here is part of a paradigm shift, that like we're just now kind of launching the 21st century, and we're at the gateway. And maybe the pandemic is the turning point for the new century. I'm not sure, but it's been building, and of course along the way, British Columbia passed its DRIPA Act, the UN Declaration Act, to begin a framework of implementing the declaration here. But I've been on that work for a lot longer than that. But the fact that the province made a commitment didn't hurt anything. So it enhanced the idea that we're shifting paradigm. We're moving off into a new direction of relationships, and being a part of that and pushing that agenda in the post-secondary has been really fulfilling for me. It's also been the most challenging because like I mentioned, the institution has its roots in the Middle Ages, and its structure is very well-formed. There are a lot of people very committed to it and don't see any reason for a paradigm shift. And since this is the West Coast, they'll rarely tell you they don't believe in the paradigm shift. They'll smile to your face and then work behind your back in what I would say is resistance with a smiling face. So the challenge is trying to sort out actual support from resistance with a smiling face. And it isn't always clear who you're dealing with at the beginning. You have to wait and see where their feet go, because everyone says they support this agenda, but you have to look deeper, and you can't believe too quickly because you have to watch where the feet go. And so I've become quite a bit guarded. I don't take things at face value. I wait and see the follow-up. But then again, I'm working with that 80% in the middle. So if someone's going to be completely resistant, I don't spend my time and energy there. I work on the places where there are actual interest and desire to work. So it's the same thing that's fulfilling and challenging. And nothing here is linear. I mean, everything comes in stops and starts and ups and downs. And hopefully in all of those back and forths, we're moving ahead, but no guarantees either. There could be backlash just as quickly as we move forward. So we just all have to be realistic about that.
Yeah, well put for both of you. Aroha.
Yeah, kia ora. So I agree with everything that's been said about being part of the envisioning for the institution and the opportunity that's presented there. I like that kind of work. I love it. I love trying to think differently. I look forward to moving past incremental change and getting to transformational change. And I do think it's hard for big old universities. I can imagine this creaking old institution trying to turn itself towards a Māori world, but I actually want it to, the institution could just relax and let the Māori world, become immersed in the Māori world. That might be another way of doing it. It might take less resistance that way. So I love thinking about that kind of thing. I do, that's something that I have really enjoyed, and I've done some great stuff with the senior leaders in our faculty. The story that I was talking about before about the history of the university, we did a whole day of workshopping with them, and that was really at the centre of a lot of what we did with them. And it wasn't directly about our roles as associate deans and senior leaders, but it had to think through some of that material. They had to shift, and we deliberately did not do it in a lecture style. So it's quite disruptive as a process, as well as new content for them and different ways of thinking about things. The challenging things for me, I really struggle with the schmoozing that you have to do in these leadership roles. I'm not, I'm always going to spill food on myself, or I'm going to say something that I think is hilarious and someone else is going to find really offensive. I'm terrible at it. I can do small groups, but when you do this sort of big drinks and nibble stuff, I'm just a complete mess. And really, I shouldn't drink at those, not even a sip at those things, because I'm already a mess inside, without having tipping wine on it. And we have had some really hard stuff to deal with out of COVID. We've had a voluntary leaving scheme here, and our faculty was quite lucky in a way because we had enough people volunteered to leave and take up the redundancy options that were available, that we don't have to have compulsory redundancies. But it was still hard work to, see a mass exodus of colleagues and to have to do that work confidentially as well, I think added weight to it. So, yeah. So those are specific challenge and a more kind of personal challenge for me.
Thank you for that, Araha. So we'll end with one final question, and this is to all of you, and you can answer in the order you wish. But I will ask you to keep your answer to 1 minute. What advice would you give to an Indigenous academic who might be looking to go into senior administration at the university?
I'm still unmuted, so I'll go. I would say set your own vision and your own goal, regardless of what's going on in the university and regardless of what the university's priorities are. Set something that is for you and keep that at the forefront. Yeah.
Nice. How about you, Lorena?
That's a big question, and thank you for including me in the discussion. I can just sit here forever listening to all of you. I would agree with Aroha because when I took on this role, I indicated that I was interested in Indigenous languages, so developing a program that would support Indigenous language revitalization, and the university supported that. And that hasn't been my only focus, but it certainly has been my passion. So that passion is my driving force when things get challenging at work. I know that I have something very concrete that I want to accomplish. So I think having some passion in the work that you're doing is really important. I also think that building relationships with the people that you work with, good relationships based on trust and honesty is critical. So it takes a while to build those relationships. I would say it took me about a year to figure out the people that I trust and that I wanted to work with in order to achieve my goals. So
perfect.
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah. Cheryl.
I have 3 pieces of advice, both from my own successes and my own mistakes, and the things I wish I had done. First of all, I agree with everything that's been said before me. Think big, dream big, imagine, and don't be shy about it. Be clear in your head where you would like to go. Secondly, in terms of resources, ask for everything you think you need and then add 20% because everything is full of surprises. And I think part of that legacy of coming out of strong community-based work is, at least in my generation, we all have grown up on the idea that we do a lot without many resources. Nonprofits are not well funded, so we've been able to work miracles out there at the grassroots with very little funding. Switch that. When you're in a university institution, don't behave that way. Ask for more. Get yourself well resourced because it's always going to take more than what you think at the outset. So add 20% to your biggest ask. And then above all, always act with integrity because there's a target on your back at all times, and someone is out to find the flaw or to find where you might have expensed something that you shouldn't have or overspent something. So keep integrity always at the top of your list, and honesty. Lorena mentioned honesty. I absolutely believe that. Act with honesty, in good relation, and keep integrity as your highest value. That's your shield from all of the targets that are painted on your back.
Thank you for that, Cheryl. Florence.
Yeah, I would say that I would also add, in addition to what my colleagues have said, is to take the opportunity to get involved in university governance systems of some kind, to understand the processes that work at each institution, and to understand the different ways that decisions get made and priorities get set. So when I was a graduate student, I was actively involved in the Graduate Students Association when I was doing a master's degree, and that really helped me understand. And so even in my first academic position, I got involved in the governance structure to understand how the institution worked. So I think that's really helpful as well. And keeping in touch with the piece about being honest, and not just with yourself, but with the people around you, and walking in that with integrity to actually, another piece that really kind of burns me at universities is that we theorize a lot, but we don't walk the talk. And so I've always found ways to walk the talk. And that is really important for me. So that's hard to do sometimes because we can theorize really well. That's what we were trained to do as academics. We weren't trained to walk very well. And thank you.
Thanks, Florence. And last but certainly not least, Mary Jane. Oh, can't hear you.
I'm going to defer to all of the experts here in administration. I'm watching as somebody who really wants to learn more. And I thank you all so much for giving your time tonight to teach us about these positions and what's entailed and what kinds of approaches. Like, I think there's a lot of actual life lessons that we're getting from you tonight, just not just about administration, but how to approach our research projects, our teaching, and everything. So I want to thank Dr. Anderson, Dr. Glenfield, Dr. Harris, and Dr. Lightfoot for joining us tonight and for sharing all of these great thoughts. Chris and I and the group have talked about maybe doing a publication out of this because I think this is such valuable information. I imagine there'd be a lot of interest in it. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. It was definitely an honor to be able to moderate this.